Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our town hall meeting this evening. My name is Gabby Camarada. I'm a resident and concerned citizen off of Northwest Road. I've recently have been extremely involved in the growing industrial scale CAFOs, also known as concentrated animal feeding operations in this area. It is my pleasure to introduce Mark Steiner from the Mark Steiner Show, all the way from Baltimore to moderate our panel this evening. And we hope that everybody will come out of this meeting tonight with more questions answered than questions left. So thank you very much. I'll leave it to Mark to introduce the rest of the panel.
Good evening, everybody. Good to have you all here. It's good to be here as well. And our show also, by the way, is once a week on Delmarva Public Radio, so we're on the shore as well, not just across the bay. And so there's a lot we're going to try to talk about tonight here with our panel and with you. And there's a microphone here to my left, and that microphone is for the audience to get up and say what they have to say, questions they have, thoughts they want to share as we have the discussion with the panel and with everybody here. And as we start, I want to welcome everybody. This town meeting is brought to you by a coalition of groups across Delmarva, including Concerned Citizens Against Industrial CAFOs, they're a Comico branch of the NAACP, ST Coastal Trust, the Circle of Leaders, the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, and Moms Across America Eastern Shore Chapter. And just the media that is here, I want to remind you that the Town Hall Organizing Committee will hold a press conference immediately following the end of this Town Hall. And you can join Concerned Citizens, NAACP, Circle of Leaders, SRAP, and ST Coastal Trust to answer your questions. And we want you to leave here tonight, they want you to leave here tonight with a call for action. And we'll talk a bit about that more for the Wycomico City Council, County Council, pardon me. And let me recognize some of the folks here in the audience before we begin. Recognize the elected officials here this evening. John Cannon, who's the County Council President, is with us. And council members, Ernie Davis is here. And Mark Kilmer. And also we have with us here from Northampton County, we have Janet Sturgis and Bob Myers are joining us here today. And Leila Barria Kraus is with us from CATA. Maria Shanti, who is president of the NAACP. Ed Lee from the Circle of Leaders. Judy Denver from the U.S. Social Service, right here. Where are you? Is that you? Yes, right there. Sorry. And Gabby Camarada from Concerned Citizens, you met earlier. Did I leave anybody out? Don't throw anything if I did. Just say it nicely. Okay, good. So our panelists, let me introduce our panel here. Maria Payan is next to me right here to my right. She is head of the Socially Responsible Agricultural Project that I have here on the panel. And to my immediate left is Michelle Merkel from Food and Water Watch. And to her left is Fred Tutman, a farm representative from the Patuxent River Commission and also a river keeper. And next to him is Craig Watts, is a former contract poultry grower from North Carolina who has its story to tell, and more. And we'll be joined by Dr. Julian Fry shortly. Baltimore traffic is rough, I suppose. I know it is. And she'll be here shortly from the Bloomberg School of Public Health. So let's begin this way. There's a lot here really to wrestle with this evening that, from what people have said to me about tonight's conversation in the community, is that people feel like there were a lot of unanswered questions that happened in previous meetings, one that I chaired and other meetings that I was part of and ones that I were not part of, and that people want to understand more about the issues of health and people's experiences in other counties of Northampton, where they dealt with zoning issues in a certain way, and to hear Craig's question, what he did in North Carolina, what happened there, as well as a contract grower. So there are a lot of major issues here that I think people want to be able to wrestle with as they consider whether or not there should be movements in this area around the question of having a health ordinance in Wycomico County and whether there should be zoning ideas that we need to be wrestled with about what the future should look like. And some people would think that this is a conversation that is some people have put it as anti-grower, anti-farmer, which is not where it is. That this is about not taking away anybody's livelihood, any farmer's livelihood. People have to do what they have to do to make a living. That's what the market is. That's what people do. But it's about the health and welfare of the entire community, given the nature, the reality of the economic realities that we all face, that they all face, we all face together. So, having said that, we were going to start with Gillian Fry, but she's, as I said, stuck on the highway. She should be here in about 50 minutes, and as soon as she gets here, we will have her join us immediately to talk about all the issues she has raised around health. And there's a piece that she had sent to a number of people here in the county, Laurie Brewster and others, where she really laid out all the health concerns that go way beyond hog production, where most people think most research is lived. So she'll lay all that out when she gets here. But let me just start with our panel and get them introduced. Maria Payan, let me start with you, if you might, just to talk a bit about the work you're doing and your experiences in your zoning ordinances, and lay that out for our audience.
Okay. So my name is Maria Payan, and I am a consultant with a national nonprofit, which is Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. What we do is we work with communities who reach out for help when it comes to any type of industrialized animal production facility. I work in multiple states, mostly on the northeast and the eastern shore here. I can tell you that I myself actually became involved in this issue because I had bought a house back in 1999 in Delta, Pennsylvania, across from a farm, which I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is a farming community. I am no stranger to farms, and this is where I wanted to raise my child, and we had a business there as well. I was a stone's throw across the street from cattle on pasture, and we had horses in the back pasture, and things were lovely until the farmer sold the land. And the farmer had sold the land to an absentee owner who had come in and started constructing chicken house after chicken house after chicken house. And when I'm saying chicken houses, these are 600-foot buildings. They are 25,000 birds per piece in each building confined. So it was 100,000 birds. And one of the biggest effects and impacts that you have with these kind of operations is the dust. Literally, it was a street that separated my house from their house. Some of the things that I experienced and my family experienced as we lived there and this came into production was my son would get off the bus and he would throw up from the smell. He would vomit. That's completely unacceptable. This is your body's way of getting rid of a toxin. The state regulates certain things when it comes to these confinement facilities. Certain things are not regulated and are a direct public health risk. There has been a lot of science that has been documented more and more each year. Whether it is Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, ammonia is ammonia, hydrogen sulfide is hydrogen sulfide, pathogens are pathogens, MRSA is MRSA. There are problems. When we would have company over, my son would bring his friends over from school. I would have to call them in when the air got too bad and it stunk too bad because they were inhaling things that were not good for them, and the air quality was not good enough for them to play outside. I will say that one of my son's best friends was the largest farmer in York County, and he was not allowed to come over to our house because it was contaminated over there. So when you have school children and you think of this, and this is your family and your children, this is not what most people consider a home atmosphere to be. one of the problems that has occurred is farming has changed dramatically over the years. And what started out to be smaller number of animals has now grown into larger number of animals, confinements, and now we're seeing a very aggressive, different type of projects down here. A lot of developers that are putting in huge number of houses, and these houses are on a small parcel of land, so it does not have a lot of buffers around it. What I have helped communities do is to address the problems with public health, and communities have joined together, much like what we see down here. If you look at the full room, this is a community that's standing shoulder to shoulder, and I'll tell you, it is a subject where you have to find a balance, and that is a difficult thing to do when you're talking about these very large industrialized animal production facilities. So in Cadorus Township in Pennsylvania, we were able to, in August, pass a health ordinance. And what the health ordinance does is address things that the state does not already address in permitting. For example, the state does not address how far one facility is sited from another facility. And the reason for that is biosecurity. I have numerous studies up here where the industry would never have gone down this road years ago. They would set up a facility and not set another one, so close to where they put a large facility. It would be a mile or 2 miles away. Now we're seeing facility next to facility next to facility. Matter of fact, I found one, they had 5 different integrators within a half mile. When things happen, like avian influenza or some type of problem like that, that is the pathogens or the viral is spread airborne, you have problems now. Now you have where this is blowing, and we saw it, in the past year, but where they had to call 47 million birds. What comes out of the fan affects what you breathe into your lungs. The ones that are most impacted are children and the elderly. Asthma, COPD. We were successfully able to do this because we brought the science and addressed that there was nothing in place to create a balance. And what I love about the health ordinance is everyone, it's a touchy subject, and people say you're trying to shut down industry. No, this doesn't do that at all. It doesn't tell them you can't build here. What it does is say, if you're going to build here, you have to take certain things in precaution. And we keep hearing how they want to be a good neighbor. Well, if industry wants to be a good neighbor, then you have to recognize that there are things that you can do to be a better neighbor. And these things should be done for the simple reason that no one should have to give up their health because industry wants to move in next door to them and does not want to do extra precautions. So this is the success of health ordinances. Anyone who already has a farm is grandfathered in, so they do not have to do anything extra. The community that we did pass this in, there are 4,000 people in that community. The operation that they wanted to expand would have expanded this facility to 3 million birds. So this is not in any way what we want to call a family farm. This is major industry, and there are health effects. So the community stood together shoulder to shoulder. Farmers were part of the conversation as well because they were being impacted. It wasn't an us against them. It's, okay, we have a problem here. Let's sit down. Let's come together as a community. Let's put some common sense things in place that are going to create that balance. And, often you see hesitation at the leadership level. And I will say that the township that passed this, as well as a county that passed it in another state that I talked to, they both told me in the beginning they were apprehensive. But this is the best thing they could have done because it created that balance without the conflict. So it's not a you can't come, it's you can come, but UV lighting, that kills pathogens. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about separation distances. Let's talk about a health permit so that if something goes wrong, there is a means to go in and inspect and enforce.
Let me now introduce Dr. Jillian Fry, who is from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Good to see you, Jillian. And I think one of the issues from what we understand that really, capture a pen, sorry, that is one of the points where people really are kind of wrestling with it, reality lives, are the questions of the health consequences, which is what you were studying and the letters that you wrote to officials here. So rather than me waxing on them, let you just speak up there.
So thank you for having me. I apologize for being late. So the health concerns related to industrial food animal production relate to what is coming out of the house, what is coming off of the land where the waste might be stored, and also what is running off where the waste is applied to land. And you all are very familiar with poultry houses, but I just want to remind you about the industrial-sized fans that are on the end of every poultry house. And we need to remember that if those fans shut down, the gases build up and other things build up in the house, and the bird's health suffers. They probably can't survive for that long. I'm sure there's people in the audience who could tell me exactly how long they could survive. And all of those gases, ammonia, volatile organic compounds, and also particulate matter, all of that is being pushed out into the environment where people are living. Sometimes the route of exposure from the house to the community is not very direct because there is a setback or the way that the house is situated. There are things that can be done to reduce the risks from being exposed to the things that are coming out of the fans. And like Maria said, it also has to do with density of houses, size of houses, the number of houses at the operation. That all needs to be taken into account. And as the density goes up, the size goes up, and the concentration of operations goes up, so does the risk if people are living nearby. When waste leaches into groundwater, the contaminants we're worried about there are nutrients, especially nitrates, because of the health concerns when nitrates are in your drinking water. Some of the health risks having to do with nitrates in your drinking water, they can be, it's very damaging for babies, particularly if they drink water or have water in their bottle with formula that have high nitrate levels. It can actually be fatal. And we're under the impression that that is a rare disorder, and I sure hope it is, but there is no monitoring on the Eastern Shore or in other states where there is very dense animal production to know that for sure. I really hope that that is the case, though. But there are also health problems for adults who have nitrates in their drinking water. It can cause birth defects for a pregnant woman. It can also cause liver damage, and it has been linked to bladder cancer. So it is certainly not simply a health risk for infants. And the way that that gets into the water is if there is runoff from the actual operation where the waste is being stored, or the way that it is land applied. If there's waste applied to fields and there's a rain event, or it's applied to fields at an inappropriate rate where there's more waste there for more nutrients there than the crops can take up, then there is very clear evidence that the nutrients run off and enter the groundwater system and surface waters. And let me just back up. I wanted to talk about I forgot to mention, the health impacts from being exposed to the different gases coming out of the buildings and also particulate matter have to do with your respiratory system. So it can be a trigger for asthma, bronchitis. You can also have allergic reactions. So there's a host of health effects that have been linked to the things that are coming out of industrial poultry houses. And I want to make very clear, there's been a lot of criticism of the letters that we present, and it's very understandable. There are people who don't want to talk about the health risks that are being posed. But I want to make very clear that just because the science doesn't exist in terms of the disease burden doesn't mean that the risk doesn't exist. There seems to be an effort to communicate information that, well, we don't know the answer to that question, so it's not something that you should be concerned about. It seems like that is the line of reasoning that is being put forward. But I want you to be very aware that there is no monitoring systems on the Eastern Shore to see what the disease burdens are, how many people are becoming sick because of these exposures. There are no air monitoring efforts that I'm aware of. There are no air quality standards that apply to industrial poultry houses. And the water regulations are actually quite narrow. It's been communicated that it's a robust regulatory response, and I understand that there are very specific requirements for permits. But the application of the Clean Water Act to industrial poultry operations and agriculture in general, it's actually pretty narrow. You have to break the law in a certain way, and there are not surprise inspections. There is not active monitoring to determine whether nutrient levels in the water is going up when there are new operations coming in. The research that we have shows very clearly that there are health risks present on the Eastern Shore. There is research from USGS. There is research from different academics that show that on the Eastern Shore, the levels of nitrates in drinking water, or not in drinking water, sorry, in monitoring wells and in waterways in general are very high and are a concern. I've read multiple reports from the USGS that says we are monitoring the water quality, we find residues of pesticides, we find high nitrates that might affect make the water not suitable for human consumption. And it is maddening to see that there are no other steps further from that. USGS is not a public health agency. They are not a regulatory agency. They are a science agency for the Interior Department. So we have very good science, not just from USGS, but also from the multi-stakeholder effort to monitor and restore the Chesapeake Bay. We have more research in this watershed probably than any other watershed in the world, certainly compared to any other watershed in the country. But the connections are not being made when the research shows that the nutrient levels are going up, and it is actually stated in their report that this is a concern for human health. There are no more steps taken to make the connection and figure out how these operations should be sited, how they should be regulated in addition to how they are currently regulated. I can stop there for now. I'm not watching my time. Should I say more?
Yeah. We can come back, and if there's more you need to add on now, please do, and then we can.
Let's see. Oh, well, let me talk about the specific drinking water situation here. So usually when I go to speak at panels like this, I'm trying to bring up and share information about the implications of industrial food animal production for rural residents who are relying on private wells, because they are especially vulnerable. Private wells are not regulated by any government agency. In Maryland, my familiarity with the regulations show that the health department tests new wells just once, I'm under the impression, and then it is certified and can be used. So there is no active long-term monitoring of drinking water on the Eastern Shore in rural wells. The USGS monitoring wells should tell us that there is a problem, but we really don't know. There was also a pilot study done a few years ago on the Eastern Shore where they held a drinking water clinic and had rural residents come in and test their water, and they also gave them a survey about their water. It was a very small study, but it showed that there were levels of pathogens in the water and also nutrients in the water that are of concern for human health. But the survey was also very informative. People indicated that they do not regularly test their water, and they would get their water quality tested if there was a glaring issue with their water. And it's possible that the small study is not indicative of the situation on the whole Eastern Shore, but I am concerned that it is. And now this is a very a unique situation where there is a proposed operation, a quite large operation, that would be sited right over the Paleo Channel, which is the drinking water source for the city of Salisbury. Public Health 101 teaches us that first you separate human waste or animal waste from your food and your water. That's what you do to protect public health. It's not technical. It doesn't have to be technical. It's not complicated science. But if you don't want your water or your food to be contaminated with pathogens that may or may not be resistant to antibiotics due to what is being fed to the poultry, and if you don't want it to be contaminated with other things like nutrients, you keep that separated. So I am very concerned. I've been reading up on the situation here where the Paleo Channel is located, the fact that the nature of the Paleo Channel makes it very vulnerable to contamination in terms of whatever is going on the surface, whether it be a septic tank or an industrial poultry operation. I'm very concerned about that. So the protection that is in effect for public water, there is a level of protection there. So that is the good news. But the bad news is that there are cases in other parts of the country where public drinking water sources have been contaminated by industrial food animal production, also industrial crop production, which there's, of course, a close link between the two. And for example, in Iowa, the Des Moines Water Works is operating a nitrate removal facility that costs $7,000 per day to produce 10 million gallons of water. And the reason why they need to operate that and remove the nitrate from the water is because of all of the industrial hog operations that are spreading their waste on the fields. They have nutrient management plans, just like it's required in Maryland, but it turns out that it's not 100% protective of water quality. So when the waste is being spread, it's draining into the source water for Des Moines, and now there is a lawsuit where the Des Moines Water Works is suing the surrounding counties for not properly controlling the runoff from the industrial hog waste. So I'm also very concerned that would happen here, and the rates that you would need to pay for clean water would go up dramatically if you needed to be removing the nitrates related to industrial poultry production impacting the Paleo Channel. And I think that's what I wanted to cover for now. Thank you.
Go back. So let me now turn to one of the issues of health that I think is being debated and concerned with people in this county and across Delmarva is the question of a public health ordinance, what that means, what that really covers, what would that entail, what's its reality, and we're going to turn to Michelle Merkel, staff attorney with Food and Water Watch.
Thanks, Mark. I'm very happy to be part of this conversation, so thanks for having me. I am going to touch on the local ordinance, but I've also been asked to talk about whether the Clean Water Act permits that CAFOs have are in fact protective and robust, as the point that Julian raised. As Julian said, there are a number of USGS studies that show we have some of the most contaminated surface and groundwater in the nation. I think we are supposed to have someone from USGS here tonight. Judy, is that you? Raise your hand. Yay, for future questions. And one of the ways the state tries to minimize pollution is through Clean Water Act permits, which is a federal environmental law intended to protect our waterways that the states are authorized to implement and enforce. And the state issues Clean Water Act permits for municipal sources and for industrial sources, and certain types of livestock operations, including poultry operations, are considered industrial sources for purposes of Clean Water Act permitting. The state of Maryland first issued permits in 2009 for poultry, Clean Water permits for poultry, and their most recent permit was issued in December 1st, 2014. So the permits are issued for every 5 years. They're up for renewal, so you have an opportunity to comment on them. They are supposed to be revised and made more stringent as we learn more about technology and ways that we can do better to prevent runoff of pollutants. So who needs a permit? So first, you have to be an animal feeding operation. You hear that term AFO all the time. And to be an AFO, you have to confine animals for 45 days or more in an area where there's no vegetation grown or foraged. So these pig poultry complexes, right, are confining chickens for more than 45 days inside the buildings, not growing anything else where the chickens are being raised. And so they're AFOs. But not every AFO needs a Clean Water Act permit. So you have to be of a certain size. So in Maryland, if you're a medium-sized operation, which means you raise more than 37,500 chickens, or you're a large operation raising 125,000 chickens or more, and you discharge to waterways, or you propose to discharge, you need a permit. So what does propose to discharge mean? So a lot of these operations are designed to channel water through man-made conveyances, swales, or ditches, or pipes, away from the production area where the buildings are, where the manure storage areas are. And so because of the way these operations are designed, MD has determined that they have proposed a discharge and they need permits. So I'm going to talk about that category, CAFO permits, concentrated animal feeding operations. There are other state permits that aren't as robust for smaller size operations, but in Wacomico County, there's a way you can look up where the AFOs are in your county, how many there are, what the status is of their permitting, and you have on the MD website, the latest number is 199 operations. The vast majority of those are these large CAFOs that have permits. So we hear from MDE all the time that we don't have to worry because these permits are no discharge permits. Everything's under cover, you're good. Everyone's protected, our water's protected. But that's just a myth, and that's one of the things I sort of want to clarify is that these actually aren't no discharge permits. And so I'm going to read from the permit itself because it's a no discharge permit on its face. This is in the first paragraph, and it says, the department, which is the Maryland Department of Environment, hereby authorizes animal feeding operations registered under this general permit to discharge animal waste, including manure, poultry litter, and processed wastewater, which is when litter comes into contact with water, to waters of the state in accordance with the following conditions. So it's authorizing discharges of animal manure, poultry litter, processed wastewater to waters of the state, which includes surface water and groundwaters. This is a discharge permit. You're allowed to discharge under certain circumstances. And yes, there are also practices that are required to minimize those discharge permits, but this is by no means a zero discharge permit. So where do discharges come from generally from these operations that have these kinds of permits? So I'm going to break up the operations. So there's a production area, which is where the buildings are, where manure storage areas are, and then there's land application areas. So for CAFOs that have land under their control, where they're spreading manure litter onto the fields as fertilizer, there's also the part of the permit that deals with that. Most of the requirements, the guts of the permit is what's called a comprehensive nutrient management plan, which is supposed to address how you're managing your manure, how are you land applying it so that it's, at rates no more than what crops need, how are you dealing with animal mortalities, how are you making sure that your production area doesn't have runoff of pollution, those kinds of things. So let's start with the production area. So older older CAFOs can discharge, are authorized explicitly to discharge under this permit during a 25-year, 24-hour storm event. So that's on the eastern shore, about a 6-inch storm in 24 hours. So it's a fairly large storm, but as our storm events become more intense over time, you're going to have more and more of these events. And these are authorized discharges under the permit. You've got about 99 operations under these older permits. For newer, large operations, they are not allowed to discharge even in, regardless of the intensity of the storm. But you have a good number of CAFOs in your county that are authorized to discharge under certain storm events. Air emissions. This is a huge source of pollution. As Jillian mentioned, they are not covered by this permit. We believe at Food and Water Watch that there's legal reasons for why air emissions should be covered under Clean Water Act permits, because a lot of these pollutants, particulate matter, ammonia, deposit directly onto waterways, or they fall to the ground and then run off in a rain event off of the production area. There is a recent study just last week from the National Academy of Sciences that looked nationwide and said that ammonia was the primary source of nitrogen falling to the ground and falling into our waterways. This source of pollution is not being controlled at CAFOs in Maryland, and I've heard, MD recently say at your meeting that Mr. Culver sponsored that, they don't consider the air emissions as part of the permitting process, but there are also no regulations under the health codes or the environmental codes of the state to address these sources of pollution. So these emissions are public health threats, but also threats to the environment as well that aren't covered by the permit. So what about the land application areas? So there's also a storm exemption under land application for land application areas. So if you're in compliance with the nutrient management plan and you still have runoff during a storm event, those are not covered by the Clean Water permit, or exempted rather. The Environmental Integrity Project, and there's some reports out on the table, looked recently at 498 boiler operations on Delmarva in 8 counties, including Wicomico County, and they found that based on reporting that the CAFOs did to the state, that 79% of the phosphorus was spread on soils that already was saturated. The soils were already saturated beyond what the crops could use. So the idea is you're going to use the manure as fertilizer, and you're only going to apply what the crops can uptake for growth, and none of it is going to run off into waterways. But in fact, we know that there's a lot of over application, and some of this is not the farmer's fault. From a legacy standpoint, the state recently updated the phosphorus management tool, which helps farmers to decide how much fertilizer they can use, but that was outdated, not protective. There's a new tool being phased in. With the intense growth, I wonder whether the growth will outpace benefits of this new tool, but that remains to be seen. There's also a lot of no land operations, including in Wicomico County, where they're building these huge complexes. They don't pretend to have real connection to the land, right? They're shipping and transporting the waste off-site. Under the Clean Water Act permits, you report how much you're transporting off-site, but it's there's no real manifest system. So what EIP's report showed is a lot of it ends up on the eastern shore farmland, including often within the same county, but crop farmers that import litter do not have to report field-level information about the nutrients they apply to crops. So we really don't know what the fate ultimately is of those of that manure and whether it's being over-applied. And as Jillian mentioned, in the health context, the same as the environmental context, ultimately there's no real monitoring under these permits to ensure compliance. So farmers have to test once a year their manure litter for nutrient contents. They have to test soil samples at least once every 3 years. That's it. There's no in-stream monitoring required. There's no monitoring that ensures compliance with the Clean Water Act and to ensure that we're meeting our water quality goals and that there isn't pollution running off of these operations. The permits also don't address cumulative impacts, which are significant given, again, the expansion of the industry on the eastern shore. So there's recent data from Delmarva Poultry Institute, which is the primary trade group for the industry, showing that bird count is up 3% from 2014 to 2015 to 580 million head on Delmarva, which is I think it's the largest jump in the past 6 years. The number of pounds in production is up to 3.96 billion pounds a year, an increase of almost 6%. The number of houses rose, and so we're seeing more buildings, more chickens, more houses. These CAFO permits, as MD will tell you, they look at the individual permit. Their goal is to make sure that it's not polluting our waterways, but they're not really addressing whether this one facility is next to another facility, a house, a building. Gary Kelman from MD recently said, that's zoning. That's a zoning issue, a county issue. That's not something I worry about, right? So they are doing nothing to address the cumulative impacts of these facilities, which is why you have areas of the Eastern Shore where have, these poultry complexes stacked, side by side by side. And then finally, I looked at some comments that were recently submitted by the Environmental Action Center and some where they're ex-EPA lawyers submitting these comments, and to see, well, what about Wicomico County permits? Are they, do they reflect the concerns that I've, mentioned? And, they noted incomplete and outdated information on the permit application, including not covering the expansion of the facility, if it was an existing facility, no analysis on impacts of waterways, no assessment of cumulative impacts, no requirement to control air emissions, as I mentioned, inadequate size of manure storage areas to handle and properly house manure. The list goes on and on and on. And these are permits that were recently approved. And finally, I just want to mention, too, the state's not doing anything to make the big poultry companies responsible. So these permits go to the contract growers who are squeezed financially and have to put in practices and, as I said, should be doing more to control air emissions from houses and that kind of thing. The state has the authority to co-permit the big companies. They have refused to do so. And that's another issue that I think is worth exploring in terms of whether, if these companies are doing business in your community, you can make them responsible for some of this waste management and make them pay some of their millions and billions of dollars in profits towards properly managing the manure so that your health is protected and your environment is protected, since they own the chickens and they reap the profits. So, the question for you, I think, is, these are not zero discharge permits. They are not covering emissions like the air emissions from the buildings that are significant. And if you don't feel that it's protected enough, the good news is that you do have the ability to do something about it. So your local government, your county council, and your county executive sit as the local board of health in your community, and they have the ability to pass health-based ordinances like Maria was talking about that can fill the gaps where the state is failing to protect you. They can address density and have setbacks, not just from waterways and those kinds of things, but between houses, right? They can address air emissions and require the vented air emissions to be controlled, and technology to put on the buildings to control those air emissions. They can issue health permits that allow them to do some inspections, and they can issue fees to cover the costs of those things. So there's a lot that your local government can do, and I would submit should do, because I don't think the state's doing a good enough job of protecting you right now. So, but you do have the opportunity to self-determine. I think that's something that folks are interested in talking more about and we're willing to help with. But I was just going to say, I'll just hold this for, maybe we can get into this, Mark, but ultimately this is a cultural question, right? Like, what do you want your community to look like? I don't think anyone thinks we should be running agriculture out of town, right? But the Eastern Shore of Maryland used to have very robust truck crops, like fruits, vegetables. A lot of those crops have been replaced by soy and corn for poultry operations. You've got all your eggs in one basket, pardon the phrase, right now. And we have a report out there called the Economic Cost of Food Monopolies that looked at data from the 40s to 2012, which is the last data set that we had, that showed if agriculture was as diverse as it used to be, farmers would have made $137 million more, right? And then we started talking about, the number of acres that would have to be converted from corn and soy back to fruits and vegetables. But my question is, for communities, when you're talking about economic development, should we be thinking about diversifying agriculture, right? So that farmers can make a living wage, so that you're operating in a way that's protective of public health and the environment. I think those are important questions to ask, and like I said, you have government officials that have the authority to make decisions that can help you achieve those types of goals. Thank you.
I'd like to turn now to Craig Watts, who came up from North Carolina. And I don't know how many of you know who he is or his story, but I only learned of it recently. And it really is really interesting just to hear his thoughts about his poultry operation, why he took a stand he did. It was very popular on some levels and very unpopular on other levels, and what he learned from that process and what happened. So we're just like Craig tell his story, and we can take it from there. Craig?
Well, I initially started being an advocate for farmers because the contracts really got well, for lack of better terms, honors. It's just so one-sided. I wouldn't even go as far as calling it a contract. It's more of a contract of adhesion, if you want to put it in contract terms. But a contract would indicate mutual obligation, and I just don't see that in these contracts anymore. But through advocating for farmer contracts, I did a little media, a little print stuff, and I ran into a reporter, and he and I worked together. And so he had a girl down in Georgia, she was from Atlanta, who was he said a chicken expert, like behavioral stuff in chickens. He said, would you talk to her? I said, yeah. And so her name was Leah Garces, and she works with Compassion in World Farming. I'd never heard of her. And so she calls me one day, and we kind of go back and forth, and she finally gets the courage to ask me, could I bring my camera person? I'm like, sure. That should be no problem to open the door of a poultry house. I mean, if you're closing the doors and keeping everybody out, then you got to be ashamed of what you're doing. Well, I wasn't. Come on, you film it, make up your mind. And I know what I see every day. And so what happened was she came in early one flock, yeah, and we filmed the little chicks. And if you've any poultry farmer in this room, you get some cross beaks, no eyes, you get dehydrated ones, bacteria-laden ones, and it can be a myriad of things. And so we kind of went through that process, and so she came back a little later in the flock. Actually, I think it was like the day they moved out. And you see some other issues. You see leg problems, and then you see how jam-packed they are in there. And I think it was July, and so it was really hot, so birds were panning. And so that was in May of 2014, and so we kind of held back on it, and I think she released it December 3rd of 2014. And by December 4th, 2014, I think we had 500,000 views on YouTube. It's well over 2 million today. To say it changed my world would be the understatement of a lifetime. She, naturally, the next day, the Lord knows, the video was released on a Wednesday night. Thursday morning, it really hit full time, and then naturally, the integrator was down there, and they were coming to check me out. Those same 2 men had been down there 500 times before, and never found an issue. But they were doing what they were told to do, no problem. And I thought they were going to take the birds and fire me. But I had already prepared myself for that, because what happened was I was seeing not only issues with the lack of respect for the farmer's role in this business, and I'll just say this right now, without those farmers building those houses, none of the rest of it matters. It doesn't matter. If that farmer doesn't build that house, there's no need for that service tech, that live production manager, right on up the line. And it just seems like we are, the red-headed stepchild. But anyway, so after Purdue came out and they inspected me, and then they left, and they left the flock in the house. Okay. And so I moved that flock out, and I don't know, about 2 or 3 weeks passed. They came out and they gave me this a letter. It's called a Performance Improvement Plan for Biosecurity and Welfare. I'm the only chicken farmer in the United States of America, or maybe the history of the world, that's ever been put on that. But anyway. So but I didn't feel special, I can assure you. And I don't know what it was, if it was intimidation or whatever, but they had to realize by that time I didn't care if they pulled the contract or not, because what I was seeing was deception in the marketing. And I think that actually bothered me more than what the farmers are going through, at least there briefly. When you put something on the labels, and people expect that if they see this on this label and they don't see it on this label, they're getting a better product. And we were seeing terms like cage-free, which is absurd. Every broiler in America for meat is raised without a cage, and the reason they're raised without a cage, they got them in this tight. You couldn't get a cage in there. So the other thing was humanely raised. Says who? But the USDA actually made them pull that off the label. There were actually 2 lawsuits about that, HSUS and I can't remember the lady in New Jersey, I think. No hormones or steroids, but that's been outlawed since the 70s. Doesn't happen. So it's like what they're putting on the label is saying, the sky's the limit. Okay, and that's about what it means. So that was kind of bothering me a bit, and I saw an advertisement where the chairman of the company was going into a poultry house, and and the birds are about market age, and he says, nice, fresh pine shavings on the floor, the pellets, feed's perfect pellets, equipment is spotless. And I'm thinking, that's a 6-week-old bird, it doesn't look like that. And so I thought that was just being very insulting to the public. And at the end of the day, that's who I work for. I work for the consumer. I don't work for that integrator. I work for the consumer, and if I sat on it, I was enabling, and I would be worse than the perpetrator. So that's the story.
Great. And now I want to introduce Fred Tutman, who's a farmer, and environmentalist, waterkeeper, to give the kind of local perspective on what he's seeing.
So next month will be my 13th year as a riverkeeper, which makes me the second longest serving riverkeeper in the Chesapeake Bay area, and at the moment the only African-American riverkeeper in the nation. And I was thinking on the way down here that one of the things I'm really grateful to do, because I am excited to go to work every single day, but I'm excited because I get to help people. You know, people think about environmentalists as folks who love bunnies and birds and trees, and I love those things too. But I must say that when you improve people's environment, protecting their water and their air, and protecting land, that actually has the potential of altering and improving people's lives. And that is hugely important work in my view, and work I'm really excited to do. I get up every morning, and I'm excited to go to work. 13 years later after I started this work, I'm still excited to go to work every single day. I represent farmers on the Patuxent River Commission, in addition to being a riverkeeper, and I spend about 30% of my time in North Carolina, where my other half lives. She's a riverkeeper in Pittsboro, North Carolina, where I'm very active in the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, where, of course, we have issues with factory farms, huge issues, and David and Goliath-style battles with communities over their health and their welfare, and problems with their water and their air and their ability to function in their homes, in their communities. And for the most part, even in my own watershed, these types of battles are generally fought in communities that don't have nearly as much political clout and the power to fight back. I mean, that is a national trend, and that's nobody's secret. I mean, if you've heard a lot about Flint, Michigan, believe me, there are a whole lot of Flints out there, and some of them are in Maryland. You know, that's the tip of the iceberg. So while I live on an ancestral farm that my great-grandfather left us, he built it in 1921, and, you know, we don't have chickens on it. We grow hardship, like most American farms. And I have some appreciation for the difficulty of making a living off of the land. Or, for that matter, the watermen, who have a difficulty these days living off of the waterways, right? People who work with their hands, right, and wrest a living from nature have a very tough road to hoe. And I get that. And I believe that the work that we do as riverkeepers fights on their behalf to protect their livelihoods, but also to protect their families and their safety and their health. So a health ordinance is a very prudent step to protect public health and safety, and I would look twice at any industry that argues about even having the dialogue, right? A town meeting on any topic is evidence of democracy at work, right? And people who are angry about us even having this conversation, right, raises my concern right off the bat, right? Because what would possibly be the harm, right, of having an ordinance? If these are industries that are benign to your health and safety, what's the harm in regulating them to make sure of it? Where would the harm be? I mean, right? The benefit clearly outweighs any potential harm. Any of the lawyers in the room will tell you about those, you know, gravity burden type tests where you weigh, right, public policy, right, against the other end of the spectrum. So this teeter-totter between the have and the have-nots, those with power and those who do not, is a huge thing. It's not a small thing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm deeply concerned, right, that these communities that are facing agribusiness, right, industrial farms, different type of agriculture than the type that we do where I live and work near Annapolis, where there's the potential to disrupt lives and to compromise people's health. And an opportunity here to do the right thing, both for the regional economy, because it's no big secret, the relationship between having a clean and wholesome and healthy environment and having a robust local economy should be no contest. Right? These two things are closely fused. They're closely connected. You really can't have one without the other. And again, look twice at anybody that thinks you have to choose between one or the other, right? So I think I'll probably stop there. I'm obviously not a local guy, but again, I care deeply about the empowerment of this community and its ability to speak stridently about protecting its own stakeholder interest in having clean air and water, and a community that thrives on every level, economically, from a public health standpoint, and on every other level you can possibly imagine. So I'll leave it there for now.
So, before we interact and turn this over to the audience, the microphone's right there, we do want you to come up and have your say and put your thoughts out here for all of us to discuss together. We hear everything we heard in this panel from all the questions you've raised. The questions, there's a couple questions. One is a political question we'll come to later, about why this meeting had to take place and what preceded this to make this happen today here. But the issue is what do you do? I mean, where do you go with the reality that you are laying down? Obviously, given the debate happening in this community, in the communities across the state, and across the nation, there are very different perspectives on reality and what the reality is and how to address that reality. And I think that's very real. And it has to do a lot with where people come from and what people have to do for their living and what is at stake for many people. So what are we proposing? I mean, Jillian, when you talk about the issues around air quality not being seen, not being tested, not being regulated, so then what's the alternative? I mean, how do we even begin to know it? One of the arguments has been against, I think, the research that you and others have put out, and everybody can jump in on this, please, as well, is that most of the research we've seen is people argue is on hog farms and has little to do with the poultry industry on the shore or anyplace else. So where do we begin to really understand the depth of the problem before you can even figure out how the next step being having people who actually regulate that? What does it mean to regulate that?
And that is true. There's a lot of research focused on industrial hog production, research that has found if you live near a field where that waste is spread, you're more likely to have a antibiotic-resistant infection, a MRSA infection. But we don't have that type of research on the Eastern Shore. The research with industrial poultry production is limited. But I want to reiterate a point that I went over before, that we do know what is coming out of the houses in general. We know that there are pathogens and gases and nutrients and drug residues and different things that pose a health risk that are coming out of the houses, off the operations, and off of the fields where waste is spread. Now, in my mind, that justifies actions to be taken to figure out what is the burden of disease. So we know that there are risks. We know that there are risks for workers. We know that there are risks for people who live in the area. But I will be the first to admit, we don't know exactly what the rates of disease are that are related, or the diseases that are being exacerbated, whether it's asthma and the particulate matter brings on an asthma attack, and then that adult or child needs to be hospitalized, or folks getting a MRSA infection and needing to seek medical care. We don't know what that burden is, but that certainly doesn't mean that there is no burden there. And that's what I'm seeing that's being put forth and being presented to the community, and that's very concerning from a public health standpoint. We would never say, it looks like tobacco doesn't cause cancer because we didn't look at it and we didn't study it, so we're not going to worry about that. And that is what I see being put forth. And in terms of a way forward, I'm going to leave it to the other panelists to talk about specific policy proposals, partly because I work at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, and it gets a little tricky when you work at an academic center to talk specifically about policy proposals. It doesn't mean that I support or do not support. You can draw your own conclusions, but I will say there are many resources going towards researching and regulating the environmental impacts of industrial poultry production, resources into trucking manure to another area, resources into supporting staff members who work at extension or soil conservation, resources into the infrastructure necessary for the poultry industry to operate, resources into academic research to say what is the impact of these best management practices on the Chesapeake Bay. Those efforts are pretty narrowly focused, but there are already lots of public resources that are going into this area, and we need to open it up and broaden it and ask the questions that some stakeholders really don't want a light shown on, and say, what are people being exposed to? Let's get some air monitors where people actually live. Let's get some water testing that's year-round, that takes into account seasonal variations. We really need to use the resources that are already being dedicated to this issue. Like I said, we have a lot of evidence about the environmental implications, evidence about what's coming off of these operations, but for some reason, the questions are not being asked and the research studies are not being done to answer what are people breathing in their air and what are people drinking in their water who live near these operations or work in the operations.
So the question, I think the question I want to pursue is, so how does that happen? How do you, if the question of air quality is real, I'm not arguing it is or isn't, if it's real, then how do you monitor it? How do we know that? What does that cost? How do you implement that? What do you do to make that happen? How do you begin to understand that so there can be an argument made that's scientifically sound that tells us what's really happening?
Well, the EPA was starting a study. It was monitoring area emissions, so obviously the technology's there, but I don't exactly know what happened, but it kind of just went over like a lead balloon and kind of went away. Michelle, you remember that?
Yes, still going on. It is possible to monitor air emissions at facilities. And we know there are technologies like biofilters that can be put on the barn to reduce or eliminate certain pollution sources. I feel like we know enough to do something now if the community wants to be proactive in terms of protecting itself from the risk that Jillian was talking about, right? And as Maria said, there are townships that have already done this. You know, Codorus Township is not unique. There are 30-plus communities in Missouri, Iowa, Indiana. I mean, you know, there are communities all kind of don't know any more than we do today that have taken these steps to protect their community, these extra steps. The study you're talking about, Craig, you know, I used to work for EPA years ago, and I was involved in the first case against a big mega hog operation in northwest Missouri. They put 2.5 million hogs in a very small geographic area, and we brought the first ever claims under the Clean Air Act, which is the federal environmental law that protects your air, other laws under Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act that require reporting of toxic chemicals like ammonia above certain levels. And you know, I walked, and we started investigating other large-scale facilities because based on the monitoring that EPA was doing at that time, we knew that these very large facilities were exceeding regulatory thresholds that are set by law to protect the health or environment. And I walked into work one day and was told that I had to bring in my case quickly or lose it and drop all the other investigations that I've been working on at EPA for political reasons, not because we weren't finding problems, for political reasons. And the agency dropped all of the, you know, I was a staff attorney there. I did what I was told before I quit in order to sue EPA. But the response to those cases was that the industry came in and said, well, we need to learn more. We need to learn more. It's hard for us to determine where our emissions are. We need to develop what are called emissions factors. And so EPA ended up entering into an agreement with over 8,000 operations that gave them full amnesty. It was a safe harbor from Clean Air Act, from effluent circular laws, in order to do monitoring. The study was poorly done, highly criticized by EPA Scientific Advisory Board. Very little monitoring was done. The protocol was terrible. This amnesty, still, I mean, this process is still going on over a decade, almost 2 decades later, right? My frustration with the industry is they've been very adept at talking about studying. We need more studies. We need more studies. We need more studies. Why do we need more studies? We know that we have some of the most polluted ground and surface water in the country from agriculture. We know these vetted air emissions are blowing out harmful air emissions. We know that we have technologies to fix that problem and to reduce those emissions. Why wouldn't we do it today, right? There's no reason. It's just the foot dragging doesn't benefit anyone except for the industry because it delays the cost of doing the right thing, which is upgrading these facilities in order to address some of these emissions. So it's not that, Jillian, correct me, there's no studies, right? Jillian wrote a very good letter to the county council outlining the studies that do exist about the pathogens and the risks of those, about the surface and water contamination, what that means for public health, about the air emissions and what that means. So we know enough today to act, and many communities have acted. The question is, do you want to take that extra step to protect yourselves or not?
So can I address kind of an overarching point? I'm going to stick my neck out slightly, but I'm pretty sure that nobody up here on this panel today came here to tell this community what to do. That's really up to y'all and your elected officials to work this out. But I will tell you that at least in my work as a riverkeeper, every community that I've ever been involved with that got actively engaged in trying to protect its welfare has better environmental quality than the ones that did nothing. So if you do nothing, I assure you, you will not be as well off as if you do something, whatever that something is. And we're here, I think, to give you what information we have to help inform your decision making, but not to dictate or prescribe. Am I wrong about that?
No, not at all. And I mean, just to clarify something, I'm not saying there shouldn't be studies, right? We need more data. There should be source-specific studies, right? But I also do think that there's like I said, there are communities that know no more than we do today and that we do in this room and have still acted to protect themselves. And so it is we don't need more studies to act, in my opinion.
So I do want to open this up to the audience, get people to come up here and have some conversation, your thoughts and ideas about all this. I think that, one of it was my understanding just from reading everything I've read, and I don't live here, but I've been active in speaking and working in all the communities all over the state. One of the issues that I saw going dialogue back and forth has to do with the health ordinance, which really hit really hard, and what that really means and what that would entail. I think that's part of what of the undercurrent when people thought they weren't being heard about this. So what were we talking about?
I can address this a little bit. What we had done in Cadorus Township, and this was actually based off of a health ordinance that was in Missouri that had withstood appeal. As I mentioned, there are other states who have done health ordinances. This is not a new concept, and as a matter of fact, we're seeing more and more of it as time goes along because there are recognized problems with what's coming out of the fans. Like Jillian said, we know there's pathogens coming out of the fans. We know there's ammonia. Matter of fact, I had sent the results of the EPA 5-year study to the health department here. And broiler operations were on there, and the emissions were on there. One of the things that we did was to talk about what the state did not address, where we knew that there were problems and no protection. So, for example, one of the requirements that we had put into Cadorus Township addressed 2 things. Density, in other words, where you have a lot of facilities in a small area, because obviously the pollution is more concentrated there. We have seen this down here. I know by Lisa Inzarella, I believe it is how many houses in a 2-mile radius? 95 poultry houses in a 2-mile radius. I have done air testing over there, and I will tell you that the parts per million were above what they should have been according to human health. Couldn't do it long because you can't have the windows down in the car very long. You're attacked by flies tremendously, I will say that. So what we had proposed and passed was there were different classes, class 1, class 2, and that depended on how many birds were in each house. So if it was a class 1, you could not put another class 1 within a mile of another class 1. That addresses density. Why did we do that? Because the permits don't look at density. They look at this one specific site and they say, okay, here's what we have to do. For example, when I asked the gentleman from MDE that had come into the library about did he take into account the paleo channel, and he told me no, that they don't look at that for their permits. This is what they look at. Well, they also don't look at if there's 85 houses within a mile and a half by you while they're permitting this one. So, I mean, that's pretty clear and common sense. The other thing that we addressed is UV lighting, because we know that there's pathogens. We know that there's particulate matter that can be harmful, some antibiotic resistant. So the UV lighting kills the pathogens, okay? So this is something that, again, we're not asking them to do something outrageous. This is something that addresses the known science and public health threats. The other thing was that they would have to get a health permit, I believe once every 5 years. And that would go, in case there was a problem where the township would have to go in and inspect, it would cover the cost. I'm trying to think what else. Biofilters. That is something very common sense, and it works very well. Matter of fact, if you look into a lot of the states where they talk about odors and different things, you will see biofilters there, you will see ammonia scrubbers there, you will see a lot of things there that are just not, have not come into place within the facilities. But the science is there. So we know these things can work and do work. It's about a community coming together. I will tell you that in Cadorus Township, it was a beautiful thing because, like I said, it was a lot like this. You had 500 people turn out to the meeting where the state had come out to answer questions. We had wanted to have an open discussion and freedom of question. The state was invited here tonight. The health, where are they? They say they want to have an open discussion. Here's your opportunity, right? Where are they now? Let's talk. We have, some of the world's most renowned researchers right here. Let's talk. Don't ignore it. It's not going to go away. And 500 people in these communities are saying, we're not going away. And they're not people that are trying to cause trouble. And the council has the authority to pass a health ordinance. I think I said that the first time that I was at the council meeting. Matter of fact, there's a sheet of paper here that we had out on one of the tables from the University of Maryland Francis P. Carey School of Law that I suggest everybody take that, again, gives the authority. So don't accept things that are not true. What I would suggest is what we saw in Cadorus was the people that were elected said, hey, we know that there is an issue here, and we don't want to restrict too much. What we want to do is address the problem and come up with a balance. We were elected to represent you, and that's what we're going to do. And the night that we passed it, it was raining. There was hundreds of people outside the office. They had to move the meeting and empty out where they pulled the sand and the gravel out. I'm not joking. They had to empty it out, and people stood for hours out in the rain while they opened the garage doors so that they could have the hundreds of people that couldn't fit in the room. And you know what? They stood out there with umbrellas, with families, and it passed. And the whole community is better for it, and those supervisors today will tell everybody. Matter of fact, they're talking to other townships that want to adopt it now. So I encourage the community. This is your community. Shape it. People are put in there to represent the entire community, not just one interest of a community. So, demand that democracy is being met, push forward, and create a safe place where everybody can coexist to a degree that will be protective of public health and not to the point where it's stomping economic interests. And I don't think the health ordinance does that.
So let me suggest, if anybody else wants to jump in, I want to suggest people come to the mic. I want to ask some people to come to the mic and say a couple things as well. And on your way there, there's a petition being handed out to the audience that is asking the Wacomico County Council and County Executive to pass a health ordinance. And if you live around here in Delmarva, you can sign it. Just please print so we can be seen and you'll know where you live, where you're from. And that's going to be passed out here now while this conversation is taking place. Let me just, there's a couple people here. So please come on up. There's the mic. I want to hear from you and hear what you have to say. But let me first ask Judy Denver, if I could, from the U.S. Coast Geodetic Survey. I just, what did I say, geodetic? I meant geological, I apologize. Been a long day, forgive me. But what Julian was saying earlier, and just to talk a bit about what you as a scientific agency found in the work you did in the Paleo Channel.
Well, first I wanted to thank Jillian for representing us so well, because it really does mean a lot to know that people use what we do. We are an agency that tries to work for people by understanding environmental situations, problems, non-problems, just conditions overall, and then giving them to you and to other regulatory agencies, anyone that needs them, to help them make decisions. We don't make the decisions, we just look at the science. As far as the Paleo Channel, it's a part, the Delmarva Peninsula has a wonderful water resource. We have the unconfined aquifers that cover the entire peninsula. The Paleo Channel is by far the thickest part of that unconfined system. It actually cuts down into some of the confined aquifers. We have over 7,000 feet of sediment above bedrock down in Ocean City. Not all of it's potable. But most of it is, we have more water than we can use. Because we have a large water table aquifer, we get replenishment every year. So what we've used at this point, we're getting back. But it also comes at a price with what we do on the land surface as far as water quality, as you mentioned. We have very permeable sands. Most of it's from old fluvial channels, from beach deposits, from estuarine deposits. So we have a lot of infiltration potential. We have a very shallow water table. You know, many of you don't have basements, I'm sure, down here. Probably, I don't imagine there's very many basements unless you're on a remnant sand dune. And some years they might get wet. I don't have a basement. My water table's down about 4 feet from below my house in Lewis, Delaware. But we also have a history of agriculture. As we know, it's our most important industry as far as money and economics. But over the years, anything we do on the land surface that isn't taken up by plants, septic systems, fertilizers, even dry cleaner fluids, landfills, anything. You know, in the past, I know when I started working, and I will tell you, I've been working at USGS for 36 years yesterday, and when I first came, one of the first things I saw was landfills that were just dug down into the water table, and the trash trucks backed up and just dumped it in. They had no idea the problems they were causing, and that's the same with everything else we've done where we have legacy contaminants at this point. And I know you mentioned nutrient management plans that have been done. When we're applying manure now, every farmer has a plan that the manure is considered in Delaware and Maryland, as I understand, in their nutrient management. And personally, I've worked on farms that we sampled back in the early 80s before nutrient management that had poultry houses that more or less disposed of manure at that point. And once those houses were gone and they started doing nutrient management, we saw nitrate go down in groundwater. So I do think that the modern practices are improving things. We still have as far as water quality, by incorporating that into our manure management, we still have a very, very permeable system, and it's going to be very hard not to have nitrates in our groundwater just because of the nature of the sandy nature of the soils, the high water table, and the amount of recharge we get that goes through the soils into the water table.
That's fine.
Yeah.
If you like the stuff, that's fine. I have some questions for you as well. Any thoughts on the panel before we move to the audience? Did you you want to say something, sir? Identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Rick Green, and I work with a number of people in this room and concerned citizens, and have had the privilege over the last several months to make several new friends in the community as well. Some of those are sitting in the front row tonight, members of our county council. One of the things that I would like to suggest to us as we progress this evening, these gentlemen are here for the purpose of hearing us, and I appreciate that. And in that context, civility must reign. So I put that out for you to consider.
Any other thoughts? Feel free to come up to the mic and
I have a question, and it's for Michelle. My name is Dr. Inzarello. I'm a practicing physician, and my wife Lisa over there has just mentioned about how we have so many chicken houses in a 2-mile radius. We live in Somerset County, and over the last year or so, we found ourselves being surrounded by these mega chicken houses, and we got our neighbors together, and we brought our problems to the Zoning and Planning Commission and the commissioners in our county, and basically we were laughed at. And my question to you is, because you mentioned that the commissioners have the ability to help us and do health regulations, so what is the modus operandi? How do you get the machine going to get these folks to address the public health issues, monitor the air, and get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really hard question. It's probably better answered by Maria, who's an organizer, but, you know, it's hard, but it's about building power within your community, right? Getting people organized and meeting with your elected officials and sharing your concerns and working with them to try to get changes that you think are necessary. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can't get those changes and you don't feel like your elected officials are responding to your needs, it's about unelecting them. You know, that's what democracy is, right? The government is you. The government is you. And it sounds really flip, and it's hard. It's, you know, but it's hard work. But that's how social change happens. That's how. And it's. I know that. You know, I'm aware of some of the great work that you and Lisa are doing, and it's difficult to. But people, you know, you have these meetings, and people should be showing up and should be, you know, working with others who are willing to support you to try to build that effort. It's difficult. I don't know, Maria, as an organizer, what do you suggest?
Well, I agree with Michelle, and I will say that change never, ever, ever has come about easy, and I think we can look at history and see that. But you know what it has come by? By a determined effort where truth prevails, and you use the tools that are given to you to insist and push for the protections that you want to frame your community with. Ultimately, this is your community, and you need to decide where you want to go with it. I will say that the citizens here have been doing a very, very good job. They really have, and they have been doing the right things. They have been, you know, meeting with their officials. They have been meeting and asking questions with the health department, trying to get a conversation going. That was part of our effort that we wanted tonight, because we didn't have anything where somebody has to write down questions on an index card. Anybody is open to ask questions. We wanted a two-way discussion here. We invited many people from the state so that we could have that discussion. The way you solve something is you come together and you move forward. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away. And I can tell you right now, ignoring the citizens is not going to make the citizens go away. And, you know, one of the things that I have found from doing this kind of work is there are many tools that that citizens can use. For example, FOIA requests, PIA requests. And I think once citizens started seeing some of the things that were being said in there, they quickly got educated on what the real deal was. When there are work sessions and the industry is invited to sit in a work session, but public health officials can't go and present when they're asked at the county. That raises questions in my mind. Why is it that when we're talking about public health, DPI has a seat at the work session, and someone like health researchers don't get that same opportunity?
Julian
I'd
Fry.
like to say that I have had many falling outs with America in my 60 or so years, and the truth is, while I've lived in other places, I can't think of a better place to live. I think America is a wonderful place that has a lot of problems facing it, and the only way we solve those problems is that we work together, and we do so with struggle. I think Frederick Douglass, what did he say? He said, without struggle, there is no progress. And that's, I think, daunting to people who expect it to be easy and expect things to fall into place, or they aver because they're afraid of conflict. I think civility and struggle in that context and working together can solve all kinds of problems and can move mountains. So I believe in America, or I wouldn't be doing this work. As much as, like I said, sometimes it's really challenging. There are many things that trouble me. I think we're in a world of trouble on many fronts. But we can fix these things. But we've got to get engaged, and we've got to fight hard. Without the struggle, believe me, if there ain't no struggle going on, probably not much progress is being made.
Julian, you were about to say something? Okay, did you want to say something as well?
I just, compromise is two sides coming together, and those two sides getting up from the table, and not everybody gets what they want. It's you got to have a balance of power, and battles are won and lost in that middle ground, and there's no reason that people can't come together and do that. I don't envy these guys' position right here at all. It's kind of they kind of took the seat, and God bless you. It's tough.
Julian?
I'd like to describe some research that we did at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future that provides some context for the efforts to stop operations from being sited in places where the risks to the environment and to public health are especially large, and also efforts for things like the health ordinance and local efforts. So I led a study a few years ago where we called in different states, we called people in the environment agency that is in charge of permitting industrial animal operations. We also called folks in the health department, and we called people in the agriculture department. And we asked them a series of questions, and one of the topics was on how do they respond when citizens contact them with a concern about their air quality, their water quality, et cetera. And what we heard from these officials was very concerning. What we heard from the Environment Agency was that the regulations that they oversee are very specific. They are concerning the application of the Clean Water Act to these operations, and as we've heard, it's relatively narrow. It doesn't take into account cumulative effects. It's also not a public health law. It certainly has protections for public health, but the end result does not include protecting public health specifically, which is what would be needed from a public health standpoint. And when we talk to folks in state health departments, the number one response that they have for people who contact them with health concerns is to refer them to the Environment Agency. They reported that they do not have the jurisdiction related to these operations. They do not have the resources or the expertise, because of course health departments are very strapped for funding, so if you don't have jurisdiction relating to industrial animal agriculture, then you don't hire experts on industrial animal agriculture. So they, for the most part, felt that they were very limited in the way that they could interact with these concerns. And it was a similar response from agriculture agencies. It was mostly, we would refer to the Environment Agency, we don't have jurisdiction. There were some other responses, we try to work with the farmer, which is great, but that's not indicative of a robust regulatory system that protects public health. So I think that's really important to understand in the context of um, stopping an operation where it would pose excess risks to the environment and to public health, and then also local efforts that fill in gaps where state regulations fall short. Because when we've talked to these agency officials, they report being quite limited in their involvement with these issues because they don't have direct jurisdiction, they don't have unlimited resources, and even the agencies who are in charge of the permitting report very narrow regulations that even if your private well has been polluted, it's very difficult to have recourse on the operations that are living in your community. So I feel like that context is very important.
And can I say it's true here that the local health departments don't have independent authority to pass the kind of ordinances that we've been talking about. That jurisdiction rests with the county council and the county executive in Wecominco County, who enjoys sort of the charter county, the broadest police powers that you can have in the state. Each county has slightly different authority. But I have talked. That doesn't say that not to say the local health officer isn't involved or engaged or isn't being solicited for their opinion. One of the things that I've there's a lot of political pressure put upon local, state, federal government officials by the industry, and I have talked with local health officers in the state who are sympathetic but feel like they can't act because they'll lose their job. And for people who are sympathetic to you, you need to give them political power or political cover, right? So if a county councilman calls the health officer and asks if they've ever received a call from someone in the community complaining about odors or raising concerns about health impacts from CAFOs, I mean, that's going to be a problem, right? So you have to, if you're concerned, share those concerns as much as you can with the health officer, with your members of, your local government, with the state, so that for people who want to try to help you, they have that kind of cover, right? They can say legitimately that they're concerned, and we're hearing about it all the time, and something needs to be done, right? So that's
I would just like to ask the two farmers, if you were to build new chicken houses today, and I know the cost of about 6 chicken houses is around $2.5 million. Now, taking care of your neighbor and you produce food and that's important to you, that you're putting out quality food for us, your neighbors, would you not want to include in that bill the cost of that $2.5 million, the scrubbers, the ammonia scrubbers, something, the ultraviolet lights that would kill these pathogens that are coming out? Wouldn't you think that added expense on top of what you've already invested of about 2.5, you would want to do because you're a good neighbor to us, and you want to, as Craig said, he's there for the consumer. He didn't like false advertising. Wouldn't he want to be my good neighbor and make me happy also? I don't want to be angry with my farmer at all. I want him to be my neighbor.
As a former poultry farmer, the last thing in the world I would want would be a ticked off neighbor. You don't want that. Number one, and I'm not saying anybody to do it, but in South Carolina, I know a guy walked around. They're very vulnerable, and wound up cutting off some breakers and stuff, and he smothered a lot of chickens. Some people are vindictive like that. But to answer your question, it's interesting. I was still looking at this. This is Somerset County, but I went down College Backbone Road today or yesterday, and I met a man named Sam Bailey. And if you want to know what's wrong with the 200-foot setback, I suggest you go down and see Mr. Bailey about third week in June, and we can hold a meeting there, and then maybe we can get a little better perspective, because not only will we smell it, we'll taste it. I promise you. He has 16 fans blowing dead at his home. Mr. Bailey was there since, I don't know, he said 20-some years. Nice, humble guy. He knows he's screwed, though, but he's willing to work and try to keep it from happening to somebody else. It's the worst case I've ever seen, and you can't have a good neighbor policy. What's the chicken council? What are they in this? DPI. You can't have a DPI, good neighbor policy, when that individual's not willing to be a good neighbor. So to answer your question, absolutely. I think I think that's what happened to this industry. It's going to have to. I mean, you don't, you talk about health and what you breathe. You go to the doctor for this or the environment. But by God, there's a health of this community, and it's getting ripped to shreds. That's what we got to resolve here.
When it comes to hands-on, I'd probably better defer to Craig, because I confess that when I see horses, I want to set them free. And I did raise hogs for a while, and then I got very friendly with them, and then I felt really badly about them. And so, and maybe I'm a hypocrite, because I did have bacon for breakfast this morning. And I did experiment with chicken tractors, and I worried about them, because they were like, do they have enough water? Are they getting too crowded? And so I stopped doing that. So this gentleman is probably a much better authority on large-scale farming. I get too much in the weeds, I start naming them.
Right.
I don't think you can name 80,000 birds, right? Not the long, right?
Thank you. Ma'am, do you want to say something?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm excited about what's happening this evening and what's being discussed and things of that nature. But what I want to make a couple comments. One of my comments is, if we don't have poultry farmers who make a conscious effort to be a good neighbor, then we need to rely upon our government officials to step in to ensure that its citizens are being protected. If there are not regulations in place that are going to hold people's feet to the fire, or we're going to allow an industry to regulate itself, then that's going to cause a problem. I want us to be able to be in a place where we can actually find, I've said this before, a balance. And I also hope and pray that our leaders, our different leaders in this community are taking into account the numbers, as we've been talking about the density. If you're looking at the concentrated amount of houses that are being placed in certain areas, are you really looking at the big picture and how this is going to affect us in the long term? What is our community going to look like in a number of years? Is it going to become a wasteland because you're going to get people moving out and away from an area that they enjoy because I can't breathe, or my kid is now being born with whatever, or they can't go out. My neighborhood, the kids go outside and play. I'm thankful for that, because they still do that. They go outside and play. I want them to be able to breathe. I want them to be able to be proud of the area that they come from. And I don't want our area to only be focused on certain industries only as our main source of income. If that is the only thing that our leadership can come up with, one industry or two industries, in order to bring money into Wycomico County or to Salisbury, then maybe you need to get more education on how you can bring economic development to this area other than just the poultry industry.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good evening.
Let me pull it. There you go.
Okay, yeah. On my tiptoes. I have a question in that this is my first time coming to a meeting such as this, and our business is located in one of the areas for a proposed chicken house. So being a business owner, one of the questions that I think about, but it's also we're near a residential neighborhood. And I'm most concerned from listening to the ladies when they're talking about the health issues. And I think about the direction of our country in that we seem to be overly focused with economics rather than with our health and our well-being. And jobs are important, and I recognize that we should compromise. And I wonder why our industry has to be so close to where we live so that it's not safe for us. But as I'm listening to the conversation, and I'm listening to the things and the questions that we should ask to kind of make them consider. From what I'm gathering, is it cost effective if you're considering the things that we want to put in place to protect us health-wise? I'm wondering, is this something that has already been decided on, that we're going to have chicken houses in these areas, or is that what I'm hearing? So we're at a point where it's been decided on, so now it's up to us to say, what can we do to make it more safer for our neighborhoods? So that's where
The
we're at.
zoning can be changed though, right? So you have a comprehensive plan in your county. I noticed online it was that it is a draft. Is it still draft? I don't know. I know you're not supposed to answer questions, but it's a draft 2016. Yeah, so that lays out sort of your goals for what your community looks like, your land use goals, the zoning districts that you're talking about. There's an Ag 1 district, there's residential districts, there's industrial districts. And so you should double check me on this because I looked really quickly at this. But you know, you have an Ag 1 district, you have residential districts where if you have an ag operation with 20 acres, it can be in a certain residential districts, right? So these decisions are part of done by the planning commission and then ultimately the county council, but those are also decisions that can be changed, right? So you can update your comprehensive plan to reflect your values in your community and how you want to live. You can update your zoning regulations to more accurately reflect how the agricultural industry has evolved over time, so it's not just your sort of mom and pop farms anymore, they're these big industrial complexes and where you want them to be. And again, the county council has broad authority to do that under the zoning regulations. The difference between, as I understand it, for zoning and the public health ordinance piece is that for certain zoning ordinances, they may not apply to municipalities. So I have a list of municipalities, Del Mar, Fruitland, Bella Springs, Pittsfield, Salisbury. There's county legislation may not apply if the municipality's charter has exempted itself from particular county ordinances or there's a conflict with it. But with a public health ordinance, there's no statutory provision that allows municipalities to be exempt from them. So a public health ordinance is a broader, or public health regulation is a broader tool and covers more of your you know, covers the entire county. So that, you know, there's different ways to go, but ultimately, again, it's up to you and your elected
I just
officials.
wanted to make sure there was more than one possibility.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that's, you know, that's all online on the county website. You can see the comprehensive plan, you can see the zoning districts and what they say permitted, what uses are permitted in each district, and whether there are setbacks for businesses or other types of homes, etc. So that's all on the website. Yeah.
Yeah, people forget that municipal corporations, like any other corporation, are in business not to go broke. And so the public processes are what actually give context, color, shading to the thinking that goes on. Because if left to their own devices, most of these municipalities will do what's expedient in order to not go broke, right? And so, again, that public engagement matters hugely in terms of trying to find that balance. Without it, without that engagement, the balance doesn't occur. People brag to me all over the state, you know, that land use is very local here. Well, you know, we do it very differently in different places. And some places do it far better than others. But the places that do it really well are really engaged. Again, citizens are all on top of this stuff. They're really on top of it in a huge way. Otherwise, frankly, they'll just keep on doing what's expedient. Not because they're bad folks. They all mean well.
There's a couple things that came up here, and I just want to address them real quickly. Before I get to what the young woman said before about alternative economic development, I think it's an interesting question for people to wrestle with in terms of how you develop community, what else is there to develop. But I think that some of the questions came up about the zoning, and not to put you on the spot, but Mr. Canning, can you talk a little bit about the drafting of new regs and the public comment period? Just that. These are a public comment period. How do people get involved in it? How do they participate? Yeah, sure. I'm just when people ask these questions that came up. So talk a bit about you said the new draft, drafting of new regulations is 99% done, or 98%, but number was you said. And is there a public comment period, and how does that happen? How do people get involved?
There are public comment periods. We have public comments at every meeting. The public can make comments, and we've heard a lot of public comments over the last few months. we appreciate that. But there are those public comments, and before particular measures can be taken as well, there's some, depending on what it is the council is dealing with, such as this bill in particular, will have to go to the planning commission as well. They will also have public comments with the planning commission. So there will be that opportunity to speak. And again, then it comes back to the council again, and there will be another opportunity. So we try to provide as many opportunities as we can for public input.
Because there will be more chances on these bills.
Yes.
This was checked. I mean, when that came up, I was just curious. I'm sure people were thinking about that more than
Right.
And where they posted. How do people know about those things?
Everything, we have to post everything. You can find everything online. As Ms. Merkel said, right now, if you go online, you'll find that the legislative bill that's being presented to planning and zoning is online, together with the Wycomico County poultry standards, as well as the zoning map that references this bill references. So you can get all of that online. You have to go through departments, to the law department. You may want to write it down. And then you have to go to legislative, and then you'll see 2016 bills, and that's where you'll find it. So we have it online for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Just a point of information. So you want to come up and say something? Were you standing there to say something? Come on up. And you wanted to say a bit. And I do think it might be interesting before we close out the evening also to hear from our friends down Route 13 in Northampton County about what they did politically in their county and how that transpired. I was just there a few weeks ago speaking there in that county to the folks who have done that. It might be interesting to hear what they did politically where they live. Do you want to say something very quickly before we go to
I just wanted to address, someone had talked about that they had a business and some, how was this going to impact them? As I mentioned in the beginning, we had a business. We were there before the intensive operations came in. Everyone has property rights, okay? So the farmer has property rights. We had property rights as someone approved for a business. You can't let something off of your property line onto your neighbors, because then it becomes, who is giving up property rights and quality of life issues if something's coming across your line that's supposed to be on your neighbor's property. What ended up happening to us, we ended up having to close our business. One of the things that we sold were antique carpets. And if you can imagine antique carpets outside being washed and stuff next to all this, not many customers like to buy carpets that smell like, there you go, poop. Okay. So the other thing that happened is there were a lot of health issues that we were facing, and we got the same kind of what Jillian was mentioning, that when you looked to call someone for help, that they were not, the agencies were not responding that should have been responding. What ultimately ended up happening, we had some extreme circumstances where I was rushing my child to the hospital. We had issues with breathing, COPD, allergies. My husband had cancer, was treated with radiation last year. My son was tested last spring for cancer, and that was the last straw. And I said, I'm done, I'm going. And I vacated and fled my property, which I still pay, by the way, approximately, I'm thinking, $700 a month in property taxes that I can't sell. So if this is economic investment in your community, to watch businesses that are there, that have set their roots down there, and are part of active community, for developers that are half the time not in community, the one question that I really feel concerned about in the community is these Chesapeake Bay farm families who have been, and we have asked this multiple times, who have been in contracts with, the one or two houses for years. We're seeing these developers coming in with these operations, and they're basically streamlining the industry. So they're doing more operations with less people, having less number of operations, more intense. What happens to the Chesapeake Bay farm family who can't afford to get those kind of loans as these people?
Sir.
Hi. I just want to reiterate what Fred talked about Frederick Douglass. sure we're blessed to have the legacy of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman as great examples of agitation, organization, and liberation. And I think we're going to need that same intestinal fortitude to overcome this challenge. I'd like to begin by saying that my grandfather was a farmer, and I have the greatest respect for farming, but I don't think these chicken industrial process plants are farms. I love chicken. I love to eat chicken. I had some today, but I also love water. And if I'm forced to choose between eating a chicken and drinking water, and I think the water bottles on the table is indicative of this, that we all want to drink clean, clear water, healthy water. And so I'll choose the water any day. And I think that the current policy forces us into that choice. So I think tonight we have to resolve that whatever happens, that we as a group have to plan and organize and agitate until this idea of a chicken farm over the Paleolithic Channel simply isn't built. I think that's the greatest immediate threat to our health, because we all know that it percolates very quickly. And it's not just a question of the term you used, Michelle, was discharge. It's percolation down through a very sandy soil that will quickly pollute our only good water supply in the county. To make that happen, I think we have to propose to the proposed owners an alternative site, which I would suggest be in Virginia. I understand they're from Virginia. But the reason I say that is because one of the pressure points, and Michelle, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if they're in Virginia and transporting money here, it invokes the Federal Commerce Clause, which means there's potential federal oversight and supervision. One thing I'd like to suggest is that we ask for a Freedom of Information Act for all emails, all reports, all phone calls, everything that's taken place between the owners and the Eastern Shore. And I think we can do that since they're in Virginia. And that's one substantive act that I think we can take. The other is that I think we need to keep the pressure up at the federal, state, and county and local levels. I think we should try to involve the city of Salisbury, because this is their drinking supply as well. I think a lot of the public agitation would go away if it wasn't being built over the Paleolithic Channel. So the owners and the county council, I think, would have a vested interest in trying to, co-opt us by simply saying, we're going to build it somewhere else, preferably in Virginia, so that we don't have this mobilized community up in arms against us. And so I would suggest that we continue with these meetings, and I'm delighted that the county council's here. I voted for Chairman Cannon. I met him on the day of elections. I met him as we both went in, and I met his mother and his wife, and I was delighted. And I also met a veteran of World War II. I have a picture of him on my phone that was bent over. And I think if any American saw this person trying to vote, to walk into the voting booth and cast his vote and then walk out, you would know the value of democracy in meetings like this and what it really means to be a citizen in democracy. And so I think we need to exercise our freedoms and powers and make sure that this one chicken farm isn't built over the Paleolithic Channel.
Thank you.
You know, I was actually named after Frederick Douglass, and the quote I couldn't remember that I blanked on was, "Power conceives nothing without a demand." That's the one I couldn't remember.
Good evening. First, I want to acknowledge the lady who came here to speak. She didn't identify herself, so I thought I'd better do it for her. That is Mrs. Watson. And her husband. We met with him Mary Ashante and I met with him a few days ago. He was just getting back from a trip, but he came in his appearance and made his appearance here. And I'm glad Ms. Watson stayed. For your information, Pastor Watson is the pastor of the largest African American church here in Salisbury, and is chairperson of the Watchmen. That's a group of the group of ministers, not a group, the group of ministers here in Salisbury, and we're going to be meeting with them in the next couple of days to discuss with them their support. And why do I bring that up? Because you raised the question to the panel, all of the questions out there, where do we go and what do we do, since I want to answer the question for you, if I may.
Please do.
Organize, organize, organize. I raised that at this juncture because I think it's very important as you leave here, as you have interest here, to know that our strategy on the front row is not just to let you walk out of here and not know where to go and what to do. First thing I want to say is you've got to get involved with the people on the front row. Hello? No, I didn't hear no hands on that one. The next thing is that if you will look into the flyer that you have from the Circle of Leaders, and we agreed to everything that we would say here tonight, there's a meeting notice in here for Thursday, June the 16th, 1 month from today. We're going to be at the library in the basement to continue this discussion on organization. And it's not about where we are in terms of what side of the aisle are you on. Ours is a non-profit organization. This is a non-profit movement. So I'm going to say to you folks in the audience, you have got to get involved. A few people can't do it for you. You've got to get involved. And I want to acknowledge this man sitting here, our council president. Back in January, we had a discussion of saying we need to come together. We agreed that we need to have the pros on one side, the cons on the other, come to the table together to talk about what you people up here talk about, compromise. He's been put in an awkward position, but I want to commend you. You're still standing strong. Now, for the rest of you out there, we're going to see you on June, what day did I say? What day was it?
16th.
All right. Now, we understand, help me up here, we understand there are going to be some other meetings on that night relevant to this same conversation. What is it? No, talk about the 16th, because that's the one I want to get to. What's on? So if you got to split your time. Oh, she said repeat it. Okay, okay, come on, girlfriend, come on. No, go ahead.
May 26th at the Wycomico Public Library is the next MD public hearing for several different permits for the county, including Rockawalken and Lebanon Shield, and a select other few. So if you'd like to make comments, you are more than welcome to attend.
And coming back here, I was just informed there is no conflict on June the 16th.
Right.
So guess what? I'll see you all there.
Last few
Hi.
comments here. Go ahead, man.
I don't like talking in public. I might sound a little nervous.
Don't sound like nervous at all.
But I keep forcing myself to do this because this is a cause that really means something to me, because I have children and because I'm a lifetime shore gal. And I just want to get this really clear. You're telling me that the county council has the authorization to enact health ordinances? Am I getting that correct? Like, they're the ones that can say we need biofilters and UV lights, the county council, right?
Or is it the Board of Health? Because here they're one and the same. So I don't understand why that's not being done. Because one time when I was at a council meeting, they convened as, well, they said we're going to now stop being the county council and we're going to convene as the Board of Health, and they did so. And then they enacted some legislation and some things, about health. And so my concern, I just want to make sure I'm addressing the right people because my time's really valuable. I'm a student. I'm probably the world's oldest college student. But I'm a college student, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I'm a community activist. And I want to make sure when I'm talking to someone that I'm talking to the right people. So am I?
Your county council members and the county executive together serve as your local board of health. And they must meet at least twice a year, and they have the authority to enact the kind of public health ordinances that Maria was talking about. So
Okay,
county
that's
council
good to
and
know. That's
county
really good to
executive.
know. So, and then the,
And there's a flyer, I mean, this explains the authority, so it looks like.
I want one of
front.
those.
Yes.
I might have gotten it, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to say is someone said something about air quality, and I'm really concerned because I'm concerned about a lot of different places that are near schools. It seems like a lot of these places are really close to schools, like within a mile and a half of schools. And I know I have two sons. I have a 16-year-old and I have a 9-year-old. And in school they say things like, don't bring peanuts to school because somebody could have a deadly reaction and it might cause them breathing difficulties. Well, my concern is, what about a child that has asthma? They want to play on the playground just like everybody else does. They want to run around and have a good time. And how are they going to do that if we don't have these filters on the fans and we don't have these scrubbers and UV lights? I feel like we're like jeopardizing a whole generation of kids. I'm going to be dead soon. I'm halfway through my lifespan. I'm looking forward to getting my discount, though, soon, because I could use it. But I'm thinking about what is the footprint of my community going to look like in 45, 50 years, What's it going to look like if we don't get a lid and a handle on this? And I think, those are some of my concerns. I know they've heard me talk over and over again. I've called a lot of people on the phone over and over again. I love my community. I'm concerned about everything from school redistricting to this. I live here. I want to continue living here safely. So I just want to make sure that I'm talking to the health board or the county council or whoever it is. I want to make sure I'm talking to the right people that can help me. And I want to say, please come out to the May 26th hearing at the library at 6 p.m., especially if you're concerned about the Rockawalken Ridge Road and Levenisheel Road location. They haven't broken ground yet, so they can't be grandfathered in. It's just a piece of property on a permitted paper, so we can do something about it, I think. I've been told that maybe we can't, but I believe that we can. And that backs right up to Rockawalken Creek, which is a critical waterway and empties into the Wycomico River, which I think someone said something about shallow water tables and such, right? Maybe you can help me. What these big ditches and things that they dig, right, and holds water, they don't have liners or anything in them, do they? What happens, like I had a swimming pool at my house and we were digging it and all of a sudden it was, wow, it got a lot deeper than we thought it was because the water just started rushing in, So what happens when they dig these big, whatever, these retention ponds or whatever, and then the water's up inside of them and they don't have liners, or what is all that about?
So I think Julia wants to respond a little bit, and I think we have one more person.
And then I'm done.
No,
I'm going to
for
go
somebody-
sit down while she responds.
You're good. And for somebody who's shy, you did pretty well.
Okay, thanks.
And I do want to get one of the neighbors from Northampton to just talk about their political experience there very quickly. We only have about 10, 15 minutes more, so I want to get those things out here. So you want to respond, and ma'am, you want to come up, and when you folks in Northampton come up. Ma'am?
I wanted to make a quick comment in response and then add another point. It's very brief comment, but I just wanted to say that she's reading the research exactly right, and I share your concerns. There is research from other parts of the country on industrial food animal production where they have done monitoring at schools. This is hogs, and they have detected levels of gases and particulate matter that are concerning for health. So you're exactly right to be concerned about that, especially the way the zoning is on the Eastern Shore and how many industrial poultry operations that exist. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to comment on this Hines report. Are people familiar with the Hines and Associates report that was done for the county? So I was reviewing this report, and I found it to be significantly flawed. That was outside of the scope of the report. I was very concerned about that. The bulk of the literature that's being cited in here in terms of contaminants coming directly from the operation, it said the literature that's being cited is from the 1990s. At my center, unless something is a seminal report from the 1990s or there's a special reason to cite it, we're not putting together literature reviews of things from the 1990s. I think they're useful reports. I think it has useful findings. But this is not an extensive literature review. It's quite flawed. It's quite limited in scope. The only thing I found valuable in the report was when they said, because of Salisbury Aquifer's unconfined or semi-confined condition, the aquifer may be readily influenced by surface conditions or activities, including human activities. I did find that useful, but the rest of it I found very flawed. And the reason why I think it's important for people to understand this, we did an estimate on the 10 houses. I know the original operation was proposed to be 13 and then downsized to 10. I'm not sure where the number stands right now. But based on average production of waste for people and for poultry, the approximately 30,000 people in Salisbury, they generate about 100,000 pounds of waste per day. And 10 houses, a conservative estimate in terms of the capacity and the birds, would generate about 70,000 pounds of waste per day. So that is quite a large, massive amount of waste, and we certainly wouldn't build up houses and septic tanks and all sorts of things for an equivalent amount of waste from humans. So I think that people do need to take a more careful look and not rely on such a limited report here in terms of making that decision. But that said, I'm also very glad that the conversation has moved into a broader county-wide conversation. But of course, we know that this is a very important and urgent issue to deal with. Thank you.
I'm glad you got it out. Ma'am?
My name is Krista Hughes, and I live on Northwest Road in Salisbury. And I just wanted to thank the panel tonight for you guys to come and to give the information that you gave. I thank the council for coming tonight and listen to what the panel had to say. I think it's been very useful. I think there's been some compromise. I think there's been some great solutions to our problem here in Salisbury, and I hope you gentlemen really consider it before you vote on the regulations coming up.
Thank you very much. So, before we run out of time, just for this evening, before we talk together here, informally, I went to the folks from Northampton here, just to give their story of what happened where they live politically and how they addressed it in their community. Either one of you?
I'm Bob Myers from, I think, about 4 counties, if I counted correctly, south of here in Virginia, where we really don't need any more poultry farms. The 2 counties are totally different. North County of Accomack has poultry houses back to back. Northampton, we have only one breeder facility near Eastville. The geography of that area is rather unique. In Northampton County, we are designated as a sole source aquifer, totally different than what you have up here with the paleo channel. We have down there only the the rain that falls on the soil. We have nothing else. We have a series of confinements between the surface aquifer and the upper Yorktown, which is divided into 3 levels below that. It takes centuries for the water from the surface to get down into the upper Yorktown. There's a limited aquifer, and that is the prime aquifer for potable water. The surface aquifer, just like here, has, because the groundwater level is only about anywhere between 6 and 12 feet below the surface, can be contaminated very easily. And most people do not want to have the drinking water in that aquifer if they can avoid it. So water is a very important source for us. But that being said, I want to address the organization and the activism that is necessary. And each one of these gentlemen here on the council were elected by you. Every one of you has a representative in your council. You should know who that representative is. And you need to talk to them. You need to tell them what's important to you and give them some specifics and ask them to go forward in their meetings. One of the problems that we have with our meetings is we all have a chance to speak for 3 minutes, but it's a one-way conversation. It's not like a town hall meeting here. One of the nice things that happened in the November elections, we recognized that we had some supervisors who were working with the industry for CAFOs, and were not actively promoting that, but were allowing regulations to be written for new zoning that would give them free rein to do pretty much anything they wanted. With regard to ammonia scrubbers, Bill Satterfield, who's a representative for the industry, said if ammonia scrubbers were put into place, it's a non-starter for us. We cannot operate. Well, we all know that is a bunch of rubbish. So you have to look at these people carefully, and you have to look at representatives where you live, and elect representatives that will reflect your desires. And then you need to stay in touch with them. You need to stay in touch with your council members in public, but you need to do that on a personal basis also. You need to get to know every one of them. I was delighted that one of your constituents got to know you, but only at the last minute. But you need to talk to these people. And that's very important. I think that's the most important thing that can happen, because we elected now a board of supervisors, like the council up here, I believe, that has turned things around 180 degrees from where they were headed. And it's not much of a point, but there are a lot of things that could be done better, but we are so much further ahead in providing protection for the health and welfare of the citizens. Fortunately, one of the charges from our state government is that our supervisors at the county levels are required to consider the health and welfare of the citizens. That's a statement right up front, and that statement should be, the citizens should remind your elected representative of that at every opportunity in order to justify the ordinances that you need to have that type of protection.
So we really are almost about out of time. So do you want a quick thought? Sorry.
Yeah, very quickly. I see we have a very good group here tonight, but 99% of the people in this area probably don't understand the imminent danger. They're too busy educating their children, earning a living, and doing everything they have to do for their existence. They are under the false impression that they are protected because we are told by our government at all levels, we're here to protect you. Quite frankly, when I realized this was getting ready to go down a couple of years ago, I didn't realize how exposed I was as a citizen, what my government or lack of their action in my local government had set me up for. And I'm a little disappointed that we can't get this problem a little more advertised, where people don't know. So even if you're not good at getting up and
doing public speaking, even if you're a little too shy, to call your representative or email your representative, talk to your neighbor, get the word out, let them know what's getting ready to go down. It's very important. I didn't know, and I thought I was an informed citizen. And that's how we did it. Good luck.
Thank you very much. So, I just want to invite Kathy Phillips up to the mic to conclude this evening.
I just want to address the group tonight, and I've been sitting in the back and kind of watching all the dynamics and listening too. What excites me is, I'm a member. I live here on the Eastern Shore. I've lived here for almost 40 years. I raised my son here on the Eastern Shore, and I'm a water advocate, but I'm also a water recreationalist, and I have watched the water quality decline in the coastal bays and over here in the Wycomico River. And that's how I became a river keeper, except I'm called a coast keeper. In fact, Fred here is my mentor, my inspiration, and he, feel a lot there. But here's the thing, this is how I got involved. In 2006, I stepped up to run for county commissioner in Worcester County. And I ran on a platform of being concerned about water quality to our coastal bays. All my years of sailing my little sunfish and paddling my kayak out there on the water, I was watching things change. And so I felt a need to get involved. I had been a homemaker, part-time worker here and there, but I felt I had to at least make the effort. It was probably the best experience of my entire life, other than being a water keeper and getting to meet water keepers all over the world. But I went out into the community, door to door, talked to people, heard what their concerns were. I learned so much from it. And the biggest thing I learned was, happy, well-managed communities depend on clean water. Whether it's their drinking water, whether it's healthy, clean water that is going to help grow their food, or whether it's water they're going to recreate in. We need clean water to have healthy communities. But since folks like Gabby and you all here in Wycomico County, and Joe and Lisa and everyone down in Somerset County, in the past couple of years, since they have found their voices and are getting involved and stepping up, I've come to realize, I think it's actually the other way around. Healthy communities is what is going to provide healthy water. So, I just want everybody to stay inspired. Who was it? Nicole, who was up here a minute ago saying she's a community activist. This is the movement that has grown here on the Lower Shore in the last couple of years. And it hasn't come from me, it hasn't come from Maria or Dr. Fry. It has come from Lisa and Joe and Gabby and Steve and all of you out there in the audience. You're engaged, and an engaged community is a healthy community. So just keep it up.
I'm not going to say too much, but on behalf of the concerned citizens and several of my neighbors who I have tremendously plugged over the last couple of months, I love you guys. I just wanted to say thank you for coming out and for having such a wonderful discussion and for just being honest. And I think being honest is probably one of the biggest things that we need, especially in this time. And in this day and age, we need honesty, and we need people to speak up and to have an open discussion. So thank you very much. John, I know you wanted to say something, right?
I think,
Yep.
very much.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Barry.
Good evening again, and I want to thank all of you for coming out. I see my colleague from Dorchester County President James Pinkett, NAACP. as you can see by the petition, we are involved. The NACP throughout this country is involved in environmental justice. One of the things I want to say is that if you can, take a few of these back to your church and to your organization, get them and fill them out, and see that we get your copies. The other thing I think folks have mentioned is that you need to show up at county council meetings, city council meetings, planning and zoning and whatever. And on May the 26th, those of you that do not make it to the other meeting, we will have at 7 o'clock at Chipman Cultural Center legislative wrap-up. Your legislators from the Eastern Shore, from the General Assembly, will be there. So I know they're spreading yourself a little thin, but we start at 7, and the other meeting probably finish about 7:30. Come on over. And again, we thank you, and we ask you to be involved. And I think together we can make a difference. We're all in this together, and I think we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Chauncey. Joy?
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming and monitoring this, moderating this for us. I'd like to thank the panel for being here today and everybody else that's come tonight. A couple issues I'd like to share with you as far as the county council's perspective on this. We've been working very hard since probably, I guess, November in trying to get as much information as we can so that we can make an educated decision. My concern, and I'm speaking very frankly, I'm not trying to create a bias, but I have been very objective with this, and I know the other council members have. And I will tell you, as it is right now, the council's finding it very hard to find specific information that we feel directly suggests that there is a need for a health impact study. Now, let me tell you why. Don't start booing yet wherever you are. We've read a lot. I've read everyone's reports here. I made some notes, and I made a lot of notes. In a democratic process, you have to make sure that you're fair to everyone involved. You have to make sure that before you take the necessary steps, that it's been evaluated clearly. The one thing I'm finding out, and please, in your search for education, don't confuse CAFOs with poultry houses. Everything I'm reading, there's so much information that talks about poultry houses, and then when you drill down into the information, there's actually the swine industry is involved, or the cattle industry involved, for your own good. Make sure that when you're reading about poultry, it is about poultry. The other thing is, do not confuse manure with a poultry house. A lot of the studies that are released in poultry house reports emphasize issues that are a concern that are brought about through manure. There are two different subject matters. I want you to make sure you realize that, because in what I'm reading, it can be very confusing to someone who is just, as I am, just trying to learn. I read the Johns Hopkins report, and I read it thoroughly. I went to some of the footnotes, and not to challenge you, but I was confused by some things, so it may be a matter of clarification. But on one of the footnotes, on the third footnote, the experiment turned out to be about broiler chickens, turned out to literally be 2 climate-controlled rooms that were in Brazil. It wasn't Wicomico County. It wasn't the state of Maryland. There was another one that was done. It was a study on footnote number 5. It was a 1999 publication which was being referenced. And these were Bulgarian scientists in broiler chicken breeding operations. And we don't have any broiler breeders on the Eastern Shore. Another footnote that was referenced under poultry. And this is the report that I've been given. I've been given 6 copies of the report. 6 copies from different people. That's how many people are reading this. The footnote number 21 was from a 2007 report. It was a study that actually focused on the swine industry. I also found that on another footnote, number 7, it was a 2008 study done by the United Nations through Rome, Italy, and it referenced manure, and it also referenced South Vietnam and Brazil. My concern here is what I was looking for and hoping to find were studies in Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, in Delaware, any type of studies. Very anxious to find these. I couldn't find them. I was given a letter yesterday emailed a letter with 54 links to sites that I should read in reference to the poultry industry. The first 6 that I looked at were all referencing, pretty much were referencing manure and not poultry houses. So before we take measures and before we can prove what measures need to be put in place and to put restrictions on any industry, no matter what the industry might be, we have to make sure we're 100% correct. The University of Georgia is one of the largest producing poultry states in the country, might be the largest. The University of Georgia has studies that shows, and I'm only going by what I read, the studies actually show how much particulate is expelled from fans and at what degree it impacts the environment. The studies say that when you get to about 100 feet, you have minimal impact on the environment. And believe me, I've studied these fans. I've smelled the ammonia. I want to know if there's a problem. I'd really like to know that. But in looking at studies such as that, they somewhat discount it. And this, sorry. Hang on a second. I apologize. But anyway, even up to 300 feet, there was less than 1 part per million on 85% of the tests. 500 feet, there were less than 1 part per million on 90% of the tests. And it said at no time did ammonia levels meet or exceed established EPA or Occupational Safety and Health Administration threshold values. And when they reviewed particulates, when compared to neighboring monitoring data, particulate levels appear to be near background levels at distances greater than 100 feet from the exhaust fans. What I'm trying to express to you, I don't want to take a position where I'm going to argue with all the panels up here. What I'm trying to relay to you right now is I've been trying to study all the issues as much as any of the other council members, and I'm finding a shortcoming in the data that we need for Wicomico County. The poultry industry's been here for 100 years, 100 years, and I don't have one report on particulate emissions from poultry houses from Wicomico County or the state of Maryland. I can give you anything you want about livestock or cattle, but not poultry.
Okay.
I'll stop with that.
That's all right.
Your meeting will probably go long.
Since James' report was called out, I think Jillian has a response.
Yeah, I'll wait until he's done because I'd like him to hear what I have to say.
All right, please.
Yeah, first of all, so my center has been looking at these issues for 20 years, and if there's the reports that we cite are cited for a very specific reason. So we look for as much evidence that is specifically about poultry as we can. But there is a reason why there isn't research done on the Eastern Shore having to do with poultry production, and that's because access is very limited, resources are very limited, and there are political reasons for that to do research every year. Also, the criticisms that you have of our report, it really indicates a lack of understanding of the scientific method, because exposure to ammonia and other things that are coming out of a chicken house, whether you're exposed to it abroad or you're exposed to it in Maryland, it has the same health effects. And we would be honored to sit down with you all and go through every single reference and explain why it's in there. It's not relevant to ask for specific studies in your own county. That's not how science works. That's why the research, we would love to do that research. We don't have access, but that's how the scientific method works. You go and take a sample, and then you say, these are the limitations of this study, and this is what it applies to, and these are the next studies that should be done. And when we put our reports together, every single citation is there for a specific reason. We're not trying to trick anyone. There's plenty of evidence to show that there are concerns. For example, the USGS reports that show the high nitrate levels in the water here. I mean, are you not concerned about people's drinking water? Because people on private wells, their water is not monitored. And there are a series of clear reports that show that the levels are elevated.
If you're asking me that question, I would say certainly I am, but you have to tell me what is causing those high nitrate levels in Wicomico County. A study that shows me that.
Well, the USGS refers to the poultry industry and also crop production. It's not just the poultry industry, but of course the waste from poultry houses are being spread on the crops that are grown here. But I mean, I just don't understand you're going to go through all of the footnotes and have all of those criticisms, but you don't want to call us and sit down. On every single letter, we provide our contact information. We say we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. We would be happy to come over and have a meeting with you all, and no one has reached out to our center to take advantage of that. We would be happy to do that.
If I can,
So,
real quick, I just want to add, I have a 2.5 particulate monitor that was used at the EPA that I have volunteered to do research. The county, I believe, can probably provide some grant money for the citizens so that we could probably do, because we have approached different health agencies to try to get the science from right here. The other thing I will say is that DPI the other day had cited this Georgia study about the air quality. It was not mentioned that in Georgia, Bud Malone, this is from the Breeder, Hatchery, and Grow Out Conference in 2006, was an expert witness on a case in Georgia. The grower had pads 200 feet from the property line. No county ordinances were there. The neighbor sued. The court in Georgia ordered 300-foot setbacks and 1,100-foot restriction on distances of poultry house or waste structures from a dwelling. Bill Satterfield failed to mention this. 1,100 feet. Here it is if you'd like it.
a very quick comment, because I think we want to wrap up and let people mingle and talk for a bit here.
Hopefully short. If I understand correctly, your issue with a lot of data is that it didn't come from the shore. Yet within John Hines' report, so I was told, I didn't read it myself, there was a link to his source material from his report, and it was based on studies out of Missouri. Now, as someone who's from Missouri, and I've lived here 15 years, I can tell you it's apples and asparagus. When you look at the soil and the water the tables, everything is totally different. So, do you question the validity of his report since the data came from Missouri as opposed to the shore? I don't know if I phrased it right.
It's very specific when you know that you're talking about your soils, the soils here, and not the soils, or the restrictions or the regulations that are in place in Brazil or South Vietnam or anywhere else that maybe in Maryland. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not challenging anybody here. I'm just telling you that from our honest perspective, I feel there's a lack of solid information that the council is getting. I just want you to know that. I want you to have that message. I agree 100%, but I don't have the study that shows me what that is. I don't have the study that shows me.
I'm just this has been going back and forth here. So but we do have to wrap it up. But I think the question here, I'm being told by all folks who organizations running this are turning their fingers around. We got to wrap it up, so we'll wrap it up. But I think the question seems to me interesting enough at the end here is, what does it take for the kind of study, whether it's through a health ordinance or any other way, to be done that answers the questions that have to be answered? I mean, does it mean that Purdue, Tyson, Mount Air have to open up their farms to allow the studies to be done?
There we go. I got them on
Right?
there. Let's go.
Does it mean that there has to be some coordination between health departments and Johns Hopkins and other places to allow those kind of studies to take place and work cooperatively together to make those studies take place and let the chips fall where they may? Wherever those chips are, whether the chips... So, it's now 9:45, and if I ask for a show of hands, how many of you want to get up one morning and go to work? And I think all the people who are convening here want to have it wrapped up. So I think it's been a really fascinating meeting. A lot has come out on the table. I think what was concluded here about coming to the table and trying to find the answers in a very equitable and honest way with everybody here is what we've come to. And I think now it's up to the community to ensure that happens, because this is your community and you make the wheels turn.